Welcome back to Convos with Corryn. Sit down and learn you something. Today we are going to cover a topic that's deeply intertwined with American history and continues to impact our democracy to this day: voter suppression. Marginalized communities have been fighting for their right to vote, but even today, those rights are under threat. Let's take a look at how voter suppression has evolved and what we can do to protect our votes in this election. Today, we're going to break down the history of voter suppression, how it targets certain communities, the recent gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and how you can ensure that your vote counts this election cycle. Following the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the end of the Civil War in 1865, enslaved Black Americans were freed. But the question of political power and civil rights loomed large. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed, abolishing slavery, effectively guaranteeing equal protection under the law, and granting Black men the right to vote. During the era known as Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877, the federal government worked to rebuild the South and integrate newly freed Black Americans into society, especially in the political sphere. Black political participation skyrocketed. By 1870, nearly all eligible Black men in the South were registered to vote, and many held public office. Black Americans were elected to local, state, and national offices between 1869 and 1877. Over 2,000 Black men held political office across the South, including in state legislatures, as U.S. congressmen, and even as senators. Just a few years after being emancipated from slavery, Black people were able to obtain 2,000 seats of power. That is amazing. But not amazing to everybody. The increase in Black political power during Reconstruction alarmed many white voters and elites who felt threatened by this newfound political agency of Black voters. This fear led to the rise of white supremacist groups like the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan, which used intimidation, violence, and murder to suppress Black political participation and maintain white dominance. As Reconstruction came to an end in 1877, federal troops withdrew from the South, and white-dominated state governments very quickly moved to reverse the gains made by Black voters. The tactics of voter suppression were things like the poll tax, which was a fee required to vote, which disproportionately affected poor Black citizens. Literacy tests, unfair tests that Black voters had to pass to register, while white voters were often exempt. Grandfather clauses, laws that allowed white voters to bypass literacy tests and poll taxes if their grandfathers had the right to vote, a condition that excluded most Black Americans. Violence and intimidation. The KKK and other groups used lynching and threats of violence to keep Black voters away from the polls. Back then, Black Americans were the primary targets of these suppression tactics, but other marginalized groups were also affected. Indigenous people, Latinx communities, Asian Americans, and women of color also faced legal and extra-legal barriers that kept them from exercising their voting rights. The rise of voter suppression led to the Voting Rights Act. What did the Voting Rights Act do? In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, marking a major victory in the civil rights movement. It was designed to eliminate discriminatory practices, banning literacy tests, enforcing voting rights protections, and placing certain states with histories of discrimination under federal oversight. The impact of the Voting Rights Act was that voter registration surged among Black Americans and other marginalized groups. The Voting Rights Act empowered the federal government to monitor and challenge discriminatory practices in voting. Most recently, in 2013, the Shelby County v. Holder decision at the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act by removing the requirements for states with a history of voter suppression to get federal approval before changing voter laws. The result? This opened the door for new voter suppression tactics, such as voter ID laws. These disproportionately affect Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities who may face barriers in obtaining IDs. Voter roll purges. Some states remove thousands of voters from the rolls without adequate notice, often affecting minority communities the most. Polling place closures. Many predominantly Black and Latinx communities have seen a reduction in polling places, leading to long wait times and increased difficulty in voting. These tactics are likely to resurface this election cycle, with marginalized communities continuing to bear the brunt of voter suppression efforts through gerrymandering, stricter voting laws, and restricted access to mail-in voting. Here's how you can make sure that your vote is protected this election cycle. Some voters are purged from the rolls without even knowing it. You need to visit your state's website or go to a trusted voter hub to confirm your polling location information. Polling places can change at the last minute, so make sure that you know exactly where to go. Make sure that you also bring the right ID. If your state requires ID, make sure you have the correct one with you on election day. You can also request a mail-in ballot early. If you plan to vote by mail, request your ballot as early as possible to avoid any potential delays. And vote early if you can. Early voting gives you more flexibility and can help you avoid long lines on election day. Early voting is my personal favorite solution. Don't forget, your vote is one of the most powerful tools that you have to create change. But for that power to mean anything, it has to be protected. The challenges of voter suppression are real, but together, we can ensure that our votes count. So here's what I need you to do. Head over to futurecoalition.org/hub to check your registration. Find your polling place and make your voting plan for this election. Do not wait until the last minute. Your voice and your vote matter. Young people, this is your time. Historically, youth turnout has the potential to change the outcome of elections. Make your voice heard, and let's make sure that voter suppression doesn't silence any of us this November. Thank you once again for watching. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe for more content about social justice, politics, and how you can make an impact. And remember, the best way to fight voter suppression is to vote.